My mother wants me to get my pants on and take care of the baby that was the result of my wife's infidelity. At the same time, I am taking a DNA test with my father to try to help him through his divorce. I'll start by saying that my mother had always wanted to have a daughter. It was something she had dreamed of for as long as I can remember. Her excitement was evident when she and my father found out they were expecting their first child, who turned out to be me. However, everything changed the moment she found out it was going to be a boy. She was extremely disappointed, and that disappointment was not something she kept to herself. In fact, she has told me this story on multiple occasions throughout my life, making it clear that she had always wished for a different outcome. My parents planned to have more children, as my mother had hoped to have a daughter. However, life had other plans. After my birth, my mother began to experience serious health complications, which eventually made it impossible for her to conceive again. The thought of not being able to have more children was devastating for her. I can imagine the emotional weight of that loss, a pain I believe she still carries with her to this day. It must have been a very painful blow to realize that her dream of having a daughter would never come true. Over the years, my mother continued to express her longing for a daughter, a feeling that seemed to intensify with time. I noticed how she showed special attention to my cousins, giving them affection and gifts that seemed to be the expression of the maternal love she had always wanted to give to a daughter of her own. Whether it was additional gifts, displays of affection, or simply the way she treated them, the difference in how she related to them compared to me was evident. Oddly enough, this behavior of hers didn't bother me too much. For most of my life, I accepted that this was how my mother was and didn't take her favoritism toward my cousins personally. I knew she loved me, and I was mostly at peace with it. That was until my ex-wife, Sophia, came on the scene. Sophia was the daughter of my mother's best friend from high school, a friendship that had been lost over time and that my mother had rekindled after many years of no contact. When my mother first met Sophia, she was struck by her beauty and immediately became obsessed with the idea that she would be the perfect match for me. At the time, I was single, and my mother had tried to introduce me to several women without success. However, this time she was determined. She kept telling me how beautiful and wonderful Sophia was, and how we would complement each other perfectly. Over time, it became almost an obsession for her. For weeks, I put up with her persistent attempts to get us together, and finally I gave in. Honestly, I agreed to date Sophia more out of wanting my mother to stop pestering me. I just wanted her to stop talking about her and allow me to move on with my life. When I finally met Sophia, my first impression matched everything my mother had told me. She was, without a doubt, incredibly beautiful. But as the evening progressed and we started to get to know each other better, I realized there wasn't much depth beyond her appearance. One of the first things I try to find out about someone is what motivates them, what their goals are, and what dreams they have for the future. When I asked Sophia what she wanted to do with her life, her answer surprised me. She told me, without hesitation, that her dream was to be a housewife. At that moment, I felt an inner unease. Not that there's anything wrong with wanting to start a family, but at that point in my life, I had very different ambitions. I wasn't thinking about having kids at the time, and I was hoping to find someone who had aspirations beyond starting a family. So naturally, I asked her what she planned to do in the meantime, before having kids, and her answer left me even more baffled. She simply said that she wanted to be a full-time wife. I looked at her in bewilderment as she continued to explain that her mother had always been a homemaker for as long as she could remember, until her father passed away. In her opinion, that was the key to the success of her parents' marriage. While I could respect that it worked for her family, it was completely different from what I was looking for in a partner. I wanted someone with passion, someone driven by a purpose, whether it was in their career or a personal goal. The idea that someone would want to be a homemaker from the start did not align with my values at the time. Sophia and her mother lived with her uncle, who took care of all their expenses since Sophia's mother did not want to work yet. When I returned from that first date, I was clearly feeling disappointed. I had started the date with low expectations, mainly because I wanted to please my mother, but by the end of the night, I knew that was not what I was looking for. Naturally, my mother didn't take my comments well. In fact, she was visibly upset, almost as if I had betrayed her by not giving Sophia the chance she believed she deserved. She insisted that I hadn't taken enough time to really get to know her, claiming that if I tried a little harder, I would be able to see what she saw in Sophia. But her mind was made up. I told her firmly that she should stop insisting on the idea of the two of us and that it was best for each of us to move on. I should have known that my mother wouldn't give up so easily, especially when she became obsessed with something, or in this case, someone. Not long after, my mother invited me over to her house for dinner, which wasn't unusual. She often asked me to come over to spend time together or catch up. But this time, upon arriving, I noticed that Sophia was there too. Apparently, my mother had decided to invite her on her own to force another meeting between us. As soon as I arrived, my parents practically ran out of the house with a mischievous grin, saying, "Enjoy your date." I was completely mortified by the situation, and I'm sure Sophia felt the same way. We just stood there for a moment, staring at each other awkwardly, not knowing what to say or how to handle the situation. It was like I'd been set up for a non-consensual tryst in my own parents' house, with no apparent way to escape. I could have made up an excuse and walked away, but I didn't want to embarrass her any more than my mother already had. After all, she was just as much a victim of my mother's over-the-top attempts as I was. So instead of running away, we exchanged a few awkward laughs, acknowledging how absurd the situation was, and eventually sat down to talk. Since we were there and had nothing better to do, I figured I could at least take the opportunity to get to know her a little better. Sophia openly confessed to me that she had liked me after our first date and that she had the impression that I had felt the same way too. However, since I never called her or made any effort to contact her, she had been left confused. I explained to her as gently as possible that although she was a kind and beautiful person, I felt that we had very different goals in life, as her desire was to be a housewife. Sophia then clarified that it wasn't about staying at home doing nothing, even though we didn't have children right away. She told me about her volunteer work at church and how she dedicated her days to helping children and people in need. Her explanation made me see her in a new light and discover a side of Sophia that I hadn't fully appreciated before. I realized that at her core, she seemed to be a genuinely warm and caring person, or at least that was the impression she gave me at first. Although she wasn't motivated by professional ambitions or grand personal goals, she seemed to have found her purpose in serving others, and that level of generosity is rare. Despite my doubts about our compatibility, I decided to take a leap of faith and ask her out again. Sophia and I ended up dating for about a year before taking the next step and getting engaged. During that period, I also received a promotion at work, which greatly increased my income and gave me a sense of stability. I felt comfortable enough financially to support Sophia once we were married, which gave me the confidence to propose. The proposal wasn't entirely my decision, though. Our mothers, especially mine, had been subtly pushing for us to get married as soon as possible. They constantly reminded us that Sophia's biological clock was ticking, even though neither of us had any immediate plans to start a family. But their insistence was always there, and that made me think that getting married soon was the next logical step. When we finally got engaged, my mother, true to form, took charge of the wedding planning. She insisted that we have a grand ceremony, with no expense spared, and offered to pay for the entire event herself. She was determined to make Sophia's wedding dream come true, as if it were her own daughter's wedding, a gesture that was both generous and overwhelming. From the venue to the flowers to the guest list, there was no detail too small for my mother to handle. The ceremony ended up being incredibly lavish, far more so than I had imagined, but seeing how happy Sophia was made it all worth it. After the wedding and honeymoon, I quickly got back into my work routine, immersing myself in my job, which was now more demanding due to my recent promotion. Meanwhile, Sophia moved in with me and, as we had agreed before, took on her role as a housewife completely. However, she was not idle. As she had promised, she continued her volunteer work at a nearby church, something she had always been passionate about. However, it wasn't long after we settled into our married life that I started to notice some things about Sophia's routine that seemed strange to me. Since we had never lived together before, I was discovering little details about her daily habits that I hadn't known about during our courtship. One of the things that stood out to me the most was her insistence that I send money to her mother every month. She argued that we had more than enough and that as a good son-in-law, it was my duty to help her mother. I found this strange, especially since it was never mentioned before marriage. I had always assumed that her uncle took care of her mother's needs, but now, suddenly, she expected me to contribute financially. Another thing that was disconcerting to me was that Sophia would often go out and come back very late at night. I expected that, as a stay-at-home mom, she would spend more time at home doing things like cooking and cleaning during the day, but instead she always seemed rushed when I came home from work, frantically starting to cook dinner at the last minute. When I asked her why she came home so late, she always told me that she was helping someone, whether it was a homeless person she had met or a child in the community who needed guidance. I didn't want to discourage her from doing what she felt was meaningful, but at the same time I thought we had agreed that, as a stay-at-home mom, she would take on certain household responsibilities. That wasn't happening. Meals were often improvised and unhealthy, thrown together at the last minute. Laundry was never ready on time and the house was rarely as clean as I expected. At first I tried not to make a big deal out of it, but over time I became increasingly frustrated. I started talking to Sophia about it in quiet conversations, suggesting ways to balance her volunteer work with her responsibilities at home. Each time she promised me that she would change and improve, but the pattern never changed. One weekend, when she was out volunteering again, I decided to surprise her at the church where she said she worked. I thought it would be a good opportunity to spend time with her in her environment and perhaps offer her help if she needed it. When I arrived at the church, I asked for her, expecting to find her in the midst of her activities. However, the people there seemed confused when I mentioned her name. After asking several people, it became clear to me that my wife had never worked there. In fact, no one knew her. My stomach tightened as I processed what I had just discovered. For months after our wedding, Sophia had been telling me that she spent her days at that church doing volunteer work, but now I found that she had never set foot there. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had made a mistake, maybe I had misunderstood the name of the church or she worked at another church nearby. That same evening, when she returned home, I decided to play it cool. I casually asked her how her day had been, and she began to tell me, as always, about how hard she had worked, detailing all the people she had helped and the things she had accomplished. When she was done, I asked her directly which church she had been volunteering at, just to see if she would give me the same answer. As expected, she mentioned the name of the same church I had visited, the same one where I was told they didn't know her. It was at that moment that I understood that something was really wrong. Sophia had been lying to me. It wasn't a simple mix-up, she was deliberately misleading me, and I didn't understand why. What was she really doing during the day? Why was she lying to me over and over again? I was determined to find out the truth. The next day, instead of going to work as usual, I parked my car a few feet from our house, far enough away so she wouldn't see me but close enough to keep an eye on her. I had made up my mind, I would follow her to see where she went. I wanted her to prove me wrong, that she really did go to church like she always said and that this was all just a misunderstanding. I was even mentally preparing myself to apologize to her later, admit that my insecurities had gotten the better of me, and explain that I had doubted her for no reason. What happened next was something I could never have prepared myself for. An hour after I parked, I saw Sophia walk out the front door, but instead of wearing the conservative clothes she usually wore around the house or with me, she was dressed completely differently, in shorts and a tank top, a combination I had never seen her wear before. I watched her get into the car, and instead of driving to the church like I expected, she headed in the opposite direction. My heart began to race. I followed at a safe distance so as not to arouse suspicion, trying to convince myself that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe she was running an errand, maybe she was meeting someone from church, maybe. Finally, she pulled into a quiet neighborhood and parked in front of a house I didn't recognize. It wasn't her mother's house or any cousins, at least not any I knew. Then, I saw a man come out of the house to greet her, and my heart sank as I watched them embrace. To my utter surprise, they kissed right there in the driveway, and held each other in a familiar embrace, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't breathe, it was like watching an accident in slow motion, but I was the one crashing and there was no way to avoid it. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I tried to take in what I had just witnessed. After the kiss, they walked into the house together, arms still linked, as if they had done this 100 times before. I felt nauseous. It was clear that this wasn't just a passing fling. The way they interacted, the comfort between them, made it obvious that they had been in this relationship for a while. My heart felt shattered. Suddenly, all the doubts, the strange schedules, and the excuses started to make sense. Sophia had been leading a double life, lying to me about how she spent her days while keeping this relationship a secret, right in front of me. My first impulse was to call my mother. I wanted to vent, tell her everything, hear her voice, and get some comfort. But I knew that if I did, she would undoubtedly call Sophia immediately, either out of anger or surprise, and that would alert her. I didn't want Sophia to know that I had discovered the truth, at least not yet. I needed concrete proof, clear evidence of her infidelity, so that when the time came to confront her, I would have everything I needed to end this marriage. I had to act smart. For the next 2 weeks, I focused all of my energy on gathering the evidence necessary to confront Sophia and begin the divorce process. During that time, I met with an attorney to ensure that I protected my assets as best as possible once the divorce moved forward. I knew we didn't have a prenuptial agreement, and I wanted to prevent this betrayal from leaving me in financial ruin. The night I finally confronted Sophia was surreal. I sat her down and calmly told her that I knew about her infidelity. At first, she seemed shocked and tried to deny everything, but I was prepared. One by one, I showed her all the evidence I had gathered over the past month, photos of her with the man, screenshots of her text messages I had found on her phone, and even records of the days she had lied to me about being at church. With each piece of evidence I showed her, Sophia realized that there was no way to talk her way out of this situation. Finally, reluctantly, she confessed. She admitted that the man she was seeing was her high school boyfriend, something I had already figured out after doing some research and finding him on Facebook. She tried to downplay the situation by saying it was just a silly thing, that she was messing with him and that it was nothing serious. She claimed that she never intended for things to go this far. I didn't believe her. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her firmly that I was going to divorce her. She looked stunned. I think somewhere in the back of her mind she thought she could talk to me and get me to forgive her, or get me to fall for her excuses. But when she realized I was serious, she started pleading. She asked me to reconsider, promising that she would change and that we could work it out, but her pleadings were in vain. I knew that if I stayed, I would never be able to trust her again. I calmly told her to pack her things and leave. To avoid any confusion or any attempt to manipulate the situation with our families, I created a chat group with my parents and Sophia's mother. In the chat, I laid out the whole truth clearly and sent all the evidence of Sophia's infidelity, the photos, the text messages, everything. I wanted them to know the full truth about why I was divorcing her and to avoid any attempt to twist the story, either by Sophia or her mother. This way, there would be no room for misunderstandings or false versions. As expected, the reactions were intense. My mother was absolutely furious, outraged that Sophia had betrayed me, but at the same time, both she and Sophia's mother kept asking me to reconsider my decision. Despite the irrefutable evidence of Sophia's infidelity, they both begged me to find it in my heart to forgive her and give her another chance. Thankfully, my father sided with me. He assured me that I was making the right decision and that no one should stay with a cheating partner, no matter the circumstances. He told me that I deserved better and supported my decision to go ahead with the divorce. A week after I filed for divorce, Sophia and her mother showed up unexpectedly at my house. Sophia revealed to me that she was pregnant with my child. My immediate reaction was disbelief. I flatly refused to accept that I was the father, given that she had been having an affair. Sophia's mother attacked me, accusing me of ruining her daughter's life by not taking responsibility for the baby and by divorcing her so suddenly. She made me feel as if I was the cruel one in this whole situation. Later, my own mother doubled down on her pleas. She told me about how children can change everything in a marriage and how having a baby could bring Sophia and me closer together, as if pregnancy were a magic solution to infidelity. She told me that Sophia had promised not to cheat on me again and that I should think about the child's future, not just my pride. She made me feel as if I was the bad guy for choosing to end a marriage where trust was broken. When I didn't give in to her arguments, my desperate mother threatened to testify against me in court if the issue of child support came up. She said she would make sure I paid for the baby regardless of whether it was mine or not. DNA doesn't matter, family is family, she argued, implying that she didn't care who the biological father was. She was determined to claim the baby as her grandchild, even if it meant going against me in court. And that's exactly what she did. She was determined to make sure she didn't have to pay for it. True to her word, my mother testified against me during the divorce proceedings, which was one of the most painful betrayals I have ever experienced. My lawyer and I fought to get the court to understand that Sophia had been unfaithful and that there was a real possibility that the child would not be mine. However, both my mother and Sophia's mother testified that Sophia's affair had not been sexual, downplaying her infidelity as if it had been a simple, innocent mistake. They even argued that since Sophia and I had been intimate just weeks before our separation, right around the time I discovered her infidelity, the baby should be mine. Fortunately, in the end, the judge ruled that no final decision could be made about child support or paternity until the baby was born and a proper paternity test was conducted. Only then would it be determined whether I was the biological father. I was relieved. It was like a small victory in what had been an exhausting and painful process. At least I wouldn't be forced to support a child who might not be mine without solid evidence. However, my mother, Sophia, and her mother were furious with the outcome. Later, my mother came to me and told me that she wished the baby wasn't my child, and that if I were truly a man I should pull up my pants and accept Sophia's child as my own, no matter what the paternity test showed. Over the past few months, my mother has been badmouthing me to the entire family, painting me as the villain who destroyed her marriage because of what she claimed was just a mistake on Sophia's part. No matter how much evidence I presented or how many logical arguments I gave, my mother stuck to her narrative, blaming me for everything that went wrong. So you can imagine my satisfaction when the day of the paternity test results finally arrived. This week, Sophia gave birth to a baby girl, and we immediately took the test. The result confirmed what I had expected: the baby was not mine. When I shared the results with Sophia, she burst into tears, begging me to accept the child. She argued that her friends and family would reject her and her daughter if I did not take responsibility. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that," I said firmly. "It's not my responsibility anymore." Since then, Sophia has continued to call me and leave me voicemails, begging me to reconsider. So here I am, venting a little to strangers, because I can't do it with my family and I've never been one to have many friends. Update 1. For everyone who has asked, Sophia is now arguing that since I probably won't have kids anytime soon, I should consider this baby mine, even though she cheated on me. She also confessed that the man she had the affair with, her high school boyfriend, refused to marry her. In fact, he's never been ready to commit, which is why she had to marry me in the first place. It's now clear that she just wanted to use me as her source of income while she continued her affair. Honestly, I hope she'll at least take him to court to get him to pay her baby support. But, at this point, I don't care anymore. Update 2. I took everyone's advice and made a Facebook post publicly announcing that I am not the father of Sophia's child. I was tired of my mother supporting Sophia after everything she had done to me, and I wanted to expose her the same way she had humiliated me for months. And guess what? After I made the post mentioning how my mother stood by Sophia, she called me furious that people had started turning their backs on her. She accused me of betraying her, which is pretty ironic considering she was the one who betrayed me by testifying against me in court, trying to force me to pay child support for a child that wasn't mine. At first, many of my mother's friends and family believed her side of the story, but now that the paternity test results are public, everyone has realized that my mother was wrong about Sophia. In the comments on my post and even in person, they are telling her that she needs to be a better mother to me and that I am the real victim in this situation. After my mother called me to yell at me, she and my father got into a huge fight. My father, tired of her constantly mistreating me, threatened to leave her if she didn't give up her absurd idea of forcing me to take in Sophia's daughter, even though she is clearly not mine. I can understand that the idea of having a granddaughter is very tempting for my mother, but that doesn't justify anything she did. Update 3. It's been 5 months since my last update and a lot has changed. This past month, my parents decided to separate. My mother has refused to change and has even started calling herself grandma to Sophia's baby. She has been giving her money every month and even volunteers to babysit the child. It seems like she is finally living her dream of having the granddaughter she always wanted. However, my father has grown tired of her behavior. He feels what she is doing is inappropriate and has made it clear that he wants nothing to do with Sophia or her baby. This has led to multiple fights as my mother refuses to take responsibility for her actions. As a result, my father has moved out of the house and is now living with me. It breaks my heart that my mother has decided to focus more on my cheating ex-wife's daughter than her own family. Regardless, my father will be speaking to a lawyer this week to begin the divorce process. Update 4. What I'm about to tell you has shocked me, and it's probably going to shock yours too. It turns out I found out something that completely changes everything I thought about this situation, and I honestly had a hard time processing it. Remember in my first post I mentioned that Sophia and her mother were living with her uncle because Sophia's father had passed away? Well, it turns out that's not the whole story. Apparently, infidelity runs in that family's genes. Someone who read my Facebook post contacted me via private message to tell me the truth behind Sophia's parents' split. According to this person, the reason Sophia's father committed suicide was because he found out that his wife had been having an affair with his own brother, the same uncle Sophia and her mother lived with. So they weren't just living with him for financial support. In reality, Sophia's mother had been in a relationship with her brother-in-law for years. At first, I thought this was too crazy to be true. How can you make up such a twisted story? However, I can't find a logical reason for this person to lie to me, and considering that Sophia is unfaithful in the same way, it doesn't seem so far-fetched to me anymore to think that infidelity runs in this family's veins. But that's not all that's happened. Many people in the comments above suggested that, given my mother's behavior, I should take a DNA test with my own father. Apparently, according to some statistics they shared, though I'm not sure the numbers are accurate, when someone pushes so hard to forgive an affair, it's usually because that person also has a history of infidelity. I thought maybe this DNA test could help my dad support his case in the divorce, especially if we discovered something strange. Well, we took the DNA test and to both of our relief, I am my father's biological son. It was a huge relief for both of us because we both believed there was a real possibility that my mother had been unfaithful at some point. Even though there was no proof of infidelity, that doubt had always been there. But my update doesn't end here as my father decided to use the results to set my mother up. He sat down with her and told her that he had been thinking a lot about his marriage and that he had decided to take a DNA test because he had doubts. He showed her that he had documents in his hand, but he didn't show her the results right away. Instead, he watched her closely, looking for a reaction. According to my father, my mother's face changed completely, going from surprise to nervousness, as if she already knew there was something to hide. Finally, my father told her that the test proved that he was not my father. My mother's face transformed even more, from nervousness to a kind of absolute panic. She started to ask him to show her the papers, but my father refused, telling her that he would only show them to her if she confessed who she had been unfaithful with. After much insistence and under pressure, my mother finally confessed, not knowing that my father was recording her the whole time. This recording was her idea to get solid evidence of the infidelity, and boy did she get it. The surprising thing was not only that she confessed, but who she had been unfaithful with. Remember Sophia's uncle? Yes, that one. The story was even more tangled than we imagined. My mother had not only been friends with Sophia's mother, but she also had an intimate relationship with Sophia's uncle. All of this had been going on behind my father's back for years. Now, my father just needs to see if he can use that recording as evidence. If all goes well, this could help him avoid paying more than necessary in the divorce settlement. And as for my mother, I can only say that she was not at all happy to see the documents and discover that I am indeed my father's son. Cheating is only forgivable when it is done by her, not by other people. Update 5. I hope this is my last update as I finally feel like this story has come to a conclusion. Unfortunately, things have not quite gone the way we had hoped. My father was unable to use the recording of my mother's confession as evidence in the divorce trial as it is illegal in our state to record someone without their consent, meaning that evidence had no legal value. With his lawyer, they tried to look for other ways to get additional evidence, but it was not possible. As a result, the judge ordered my father to pay spousal support because, as the higher earner, he is obligated to financially support my mother. My father is not at all happy with this outcome, but I understand why he did the following with the recording. He sent it to Sophia. Sophia showed the recording to her mother, and, as expected, the relationship between my mother and Sophia's mother completely broke down. It's almost ironic to think that after everything my mother did for Sophia and her mother, their friendship has ended in the worst way. But the story doesn't end there. Sophia has decided to take her mother's side in this dispute, as she is her family and I am not. As a result, Sophia no longer allows my mother to see her supposed granddaughter. For someone who for years dreamed of having a daughter and then clung to the idea of this granddaughter as a way to make up for that broken dream, this has been a devastating blow. Honestly, watching my parents divorce has been difficult. It's not easy to accept that we're both going through divorces at practically the same time, especially knowing that both my mother and my ex-wife were unfaithful. However, knowing that Sophia is now alone, without a man to support her daughter and without financial support, makes this situation a little more bearable for me. In the end, her plan to use me as her breadwinner while maintaining her relationship with her lover completely failed. As for my mother, she has ended up without the daughter she always wanted and the granddaughter she dreamed of. It seems that everything she tried to build with Sophia and her baby has fallen apart, leaving her completely alone. Although I don't enjoy watching my parents go through this process, I feel that things have fallen into place fairly, each is facing the consequences of their own decisions.